Vote counting is underway in South Africa's general election. President Cyril Ramaphosa's African National Congress is facing its fiercest challenge in 30 years. Soaring unemployment and rolling power cuts are among the main concerns for many voters. Voting was extended in some areas due to a large turnout. Let's cross to Fahmida, who's at the Results Operations Centre. Fahmida, so all indications are that turnout has been extremely high.
We've had some analysts say that there's been a renewed enthusiasm in terms of South Africa's democracy, and people certainly coming out in big numbers to cast their ballot, especially compared to 5 years ago when just about 66% of eligible voters came out. We are in the very early stages of results. About 14% of those ballots have been counted. But joining me to give us a better idea of the projections, what might be going on, and what this turnout and what these initial results mean for the governing African National Congress, we're joined by Angelo Fick. He's a political analyst. Angelo, we are seeing a greater turnout than we saw 5 years ago. What would that indicate about how South Africans are feeling?
So my sense is that the majority of South Africans are now 27 or younger. That may be the most underrepresented component of the electoral roll. But actually the voters' roll, but actually those young people have seen that their future depends on their participation. The performances of political parties over the last 5 years has certainly been part of why so many people are turning out to make their mark, because they've lived with the consequences in towns and cities across this country with those decisions.
How concerning could that be, or not, for the African National Congress? As I said, we've had about 14% of the votes counted. The ANC, 42% of the votes. It's still very early, but there certainly could be some concern, not only for the party, but President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody wants to be the last person to be president of a party that has the majority of the vote in the ANC. And Mr. Ramaphosa, ahead of the elections, indicated he wanted people in his party to return 57% of the electorate in support of the party. Now, many of the polls have indicated that this will be the case, but as you pointed out, we've counted 14% of the vote. And if you look at the map of where those votes are counted, they're not necessarily in the urban conurbations, they're not in the larger cities yet. And in those spaces, we're likely to see some shifts, particularly in the peri-urban surrounds of our urban spaces, our towns and cities. Whether or not that 42% remains there, or whether it goes up into the higher 40s, or pushes itself just a little over 50, that remains to be seen. We all know that there will be a reduction in support for the ANC, because that's been the case in municipal and by-election results across the country over the last 3 years.
There are just so many scenarios to look at in terms of the way forward, the potential for coalition governments, what or the ANC may do or what it would avoid entirely. We've seen the official opposition grow to, at this point, 26%. We don't know if those are two parties that would work together. What are the chances for the ANC to maintain its majority, and with whom? And just give us a brief idea of why.
So if they score at where they're currently at in 42%, they may need one very large partner to push them over 50%. And there they may be working with the Economic Freedom Fighters, the third largest party in the country, or they may work with a coalition of smaller parties, which will be, I think, more complicated to manage, as we've seen in those coalitions where they govern with multiple parties in places like Johannesburg and formerly in Ekurhuleni. If they score in the higher 40s, so if they come in at just 47, 48, they may only need 2 or 3 smaller parties that are breakaways from their own sort of original stable to get them over that, and that might be helpful for them. If they're scoring below 40, which is really unanticipated, then the dynamic is widely open, and we may then see them combine in ways that nobody would have foreseen and that they've all denied they would, and that might be the two biggest parties. They're both saying they wouldn't do it, but politics is a very strange business, and we've seen coalitions happen between people before, particularly in South Africa, that you wouldn't have thought would go together.
Angelo, thanks so much for your time. Angelo Fick, there, political analyst. It's likely that perhaps in the next 24 hours we'll have a clearer picture of what the future is looking like for the African National Congress and which opposition parties, how they've fared, and perhaps the challenge they'll pose for the governing ANC.
Okay, thank you for that, Fahmida Miller there for us.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.